And so it's good to see everyone, and happy birthdays this coming week to our birthday girls. And I wanted to talk today about the holiday of Tu Bishvat, which will be celebrated this year, Wednesday night and Thursday this week. And there are a couple of elements about the holiday of Tu Bishvat that get to trying to understand different aspects of Judaism. Because, and so let's start with the very beginning. Tu Bishvat is the name of the holiday. Tu Bishvat in Hebrew means the 15th of the month of Shvat. So there's the Hebrew calendar, or the Jewish calendar, which is a little bit different, of course, from the regular calendar that we know. The names of the months in the Jewish or Hebrew calendar are not given to us in the Bible, and they are derived from the time of the rabbis. We're told in the Torah that the month that Passover is celebrated, according to the book of Leviticus, that's considered the first month of the year. Then we're told that what ends up being Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month of the year, again, according to the Torah. And then there's the 10th day of the 7th month is Yom Kippur. The 15th day of the 7th month is the holiday of Sukkot. But those months are not given names. There are a couple of names of months later in the Bible, but they're different from the month names that we are familiar with from our calendar. So the essential point that works for behind or as a foundation for all of this is essentially that everything that we do Jewishly as we journey through the Jewish year together is based on how the rabbis understand and interpret the Torah. Because the Torah, simply put, is understood to be the constitution of the Jewish people. The rabbis provide all the legislation that the Congress and the Senate and the Supreme Court would add to the Constitution. So the rabbis serve in the capacity of what if we want to simply compare it to the American legal system, the Constitution is to the Torah as the Congress and Senate is to the rabbis. Okay, so the major difference, of course, is the Constitution is written by human beings. The Torah is understood to be written by God. So what we're dealing with in America is human civic law written by human beings, updated by human beings. Rabbinic Judaism, as we celebrate it and observe it today, is based on the rabbis interpreting, so to speak, God's law as given in the Torah. So for the rabbis, and I'm getting to Tu Bishvat in a moment, I just want to help us understand the context in which Tu Bishvat falls. So for the rabbis, the holidays that are celebrated throughout the year are mentioned in the book of Leviticus in chapter 23, and in Deuteronomy in chapter 16. There we have holidays that are celebrated mainly by bringing a special sacrifice to the altar, which was first in the desert sanctuary, the Mishkan, and later in the temple in Jerusalem. So we have, in order as it's presented, oh, and also there's a list in the book of Numbers in chapter 28 and 29. So those three places, Leviticus, Numbers, and Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, provide for the understanding of what these sacred occasions are. So we're told about Shabbat, we're told about the first of the new month, every first of the new month, and then we're also told about Passover, the holiday of Shavuot. We're told about what will become Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the seventh month, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Those are the holidays that the Torah knows about. So far, Tu Bishvat is not listed, and we'll get to Tu Bishvat in a moment. But we also might be aware of Hanukkah and Purim. Those are Jewish holidays. How do they get incorporated into the Jewish calendar? Well, Hanukkah, let's start with Purim. Purim is in the Bible. The book of Esther is in the Bible, not in the Torah, but it's in the Bible. And so that got incorporated into the Jewish calendar, even though it's post-Torah. Hanukkah is not even in the Bible, but it's before the time of the rabbis, just before. So the Hanukkah about the year 165 BCE, the rabbis from about 0 to 200 CE in the Mishnah. So they incorporate Hanukkah into the calendar. Tu Bishvat, still not listed, right? There's no historical event. There is a historical event for Hanukkah. There is a book in the Bible for Purim. There is a listing in the Torah of the other holidays to be celebrated throughout the year, but there's nothing about Tu Bishvat. So again, back to this point about the rabbis taking the Constitution, the Torah, and expanding it and making it into the Judaism that we know it. This is the role of the rabbis to make that Constitution, to make the Torah into a living document, a document that is not just to be set on the shelf, set aside, but rather to be referenced, studied, and interpreted constantly. That's the role that the rabbis provide. And in their study of the Torah, they studied the Torah for 200 years and passed down their teachings from one generation to the next, and finally wrote those teachings down into a book called the Mishnah. For the next 300 years, they kept doing that, same, passing down the traditions from one to the other in the Rabbinical Academy. And 300 years after the Mishnah was edited, they edited the Talmud. So in the year 200 CE, we get the Mishnah. The year 500, we get the Gemara, which becomes Mishnah and Gemara together become the Talmud. It's from that foundation that rabbis in subsequent generations used those books to continue to evolve Jewish law, to study, and to evolve Jewish practice. So where does Tu Bishvat fit into all of this? So the months, there are 12 months of the year, 12 Jewish months of the year, all based on the cycle of the moon. And essentially, in our calendar, the regular calendar, we're essentially based on the cycle of the moon, but really about the Earth orbiting the sun, right? So 365 and a quarter days it takes the Earth to orbit the sun, and that's incorporated into the calendar. You make up the quarter day, of course, every 4 years by adding February 29th to the calendar. Right, so we know how our calendar works. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except for February. Okay, so we know that system. It's not that you can't, there's no rhyme that comes up for the Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar has 12 months based on the moon, 29 and a half days. It takes the moon to orbit the earth. And that adds up to 354 days, which of course is 11 days short of the regular year. And you have to make up those 11 days because Passover always has to come in the springtime. And Sukkot always has to be in the fall. The holidays cannot move. If we didn't adjust the calendar, the holidays would move, and Passover would eventually be in the summer, it would be in the fall, it would be in the winter because of those missing 11 days. So the rabbis said we add an extra month to the calendar every now and then. And I'm going to leave it at that. If you can Google Jewish calendar, and you can find very complicated articles that explain the mathematics and the astronomy behind the Jewish calendar. No reason to get into it now. Just know that a leap year in a Jewish calendar is an extra month, not an extra day. So every now and then, the month of Adar, we have an extra one. So there would be Adar 1 and Adar 2 in the calendar before Passover. So Shvat is the month before Adar. And 2 is the Hebrew letters Tet and Vav. And here's another thing, and we'll go over this. Everything that I mentioned today, we'll go over again when we come up to the next holiday and we come up to the next rabbinic concept. So it's, don't worry that perhaps I'm giving too much information too quickly about who the rabbis are and how they work in interpreting the Torah. That's something that we will go over a lot. 2, like I said, are these Hebrew letters, Tet and Vav. There's a system in Hebrew. In Israel today, they use numbers just the way we do, okay? But in the more ancient way to do numbers is to use the Hebrew letter to be a substitute for a number. So those of us who know the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, those are the first 10 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Each one of those letters stands for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every letter after that, so after the letter Yud, which is 10, the next letter in the alphabet is the letter Kaf. That's the number 20. Lamed is 30. Mem is 40. Nun is 50. Samach is 60. Ayin is 70, Pei is 80, Tzadi is 90, Kuf is 100. Okay, so you get all your combinations of numbers 1 through 100 that way. You have the single numbers Aleph through Yud, plus the tens numbers Kaf through Kuf, and then the last 3 letters of the alphabet. Resh is 200, Shin is 300, Taf is 400. And that's it. It's kind of like Roman numerals. Okay, so it's the same kind of system. So we're in, for example, let me write this out. We're in the year 5781, right? Let me just get these letters down. Oops. Yes, 81. Okay, here are the letters for this year. Taf, Shin, Pei, Aleph. Now I just said the letter Taf is 400, the letter Shin is 300. 400 and 300 is 700. 780, Pei is 80, Aleph is 1, 781. Where's the 5,000? It's 5781. The way to do 5,000 is technically speaking, the year should be written this way. The letter Hey first, then Tuf, Shin, Pei, Aleph. Nobody does it with the Hey really first. We just do the other letters, and that's enough. So 5,781. That's this year. Okay, so that's how this whole system of Hebrew letters equaling numbers is called gematria. So now,
Jonah, what is the
yeah,
quotation mark little thing?
Yes. So instead of using a period for a decimal point or for an abbreviation, in Hebrew, you use the quotation marks instead, or the apostrophe instead. So if you go to a Jewish cemetery that has monuments, the stand-up tombstones or the foot markers that have Hebrew writing on it for people's names and also date of death, this is the main way that you would see. You'd have the Hebrew date of death sometimes is put on the marker or on the tombstone, and there are other abbreviations there too on a tombstone. You would find. I'm just writing it out here, and then these two abbreviations here are common on tombstones, and I'm sorry I didn't do it as boldly as the others. This one usually you'd find at the top of a tombstone, Pei Nun, which stands for Po Nikbar, here lies, or here is buried. And then the other common one of these five at the bottom of a tombstone, which stands for Tehi Nishmato or Nishmata Tsrura Bitzror HaChayim. May his or her soul be bound in the bond of life. So these are two common abbreviations found on tombstones around the world, Jewish tombstones around the world. So again, with the abbreviations, either single apostrophes in between the letters or a quotation mark between two letters. A date, a Hebrew date, like Tu for Tu Bishvat, would have two letters, would have the quotation mark in between. So Tet is the number 9. Vav is the number 6. 9 plus 6 is 15, the 15th of the month of Shvat. You might ask, why not do 10 and 5? Why not do Yud Hey for 15? Why do they do 9 and 6? Anybody know why we don't use Yud Hey? Why do we call it Yah Bishvat? Why do we call it Tu Bishvat?
It may be confused with the name of God.
That's right. So like what Adriana just said, Yud Hey, if we wrote Yud Hey, first of all, we'd be writing God's name. 2 of the 4 letter Yud Hey Vav Hey, we'd be writing God's name, and you shouldn't be writing God's name. And if we said Yah Bishvat, we'd be saying God in Shvat and not 15. So the same goes for 16. The number 16 is not Yud Vav, 10-6, because that's also 2 letters of God's name. So 16 is always written Tet Zayin. So if you were to write the numbers 11 through 20 with Hebrew letters, you would have Yud Aleph for 11, Yud Bet for 12, Yud Gimel for 13, Yud Dalet for 14, and then you'd go outside and make an exception to the rule and do Tet Vav for 15, Tet Zayin for 16, then Yud Zayin for 17, Yud Chet for 18, Yud Tet for 19, and then Kaf for 20. So yes, what Arnie is asking about, yes, and what Margie added, the 15th of the month is a special time of the month because it's always a full moon. And so that's why Passover is the 15th of Nisan, and Sukkot is the 15th of Tishrei. If you're when you open the door for Elijah at the end of the Seder and it's a clear night, you can see a full moon. And I remember once there was an eclipse a number of years ago, and you could see the lunar eclipse for Passover. And then the same thing with Sukkot. You're sitting in your sukkah and you're looking through the top of the sukkah and you would see the full moon. So, before electricity, the lights in the sky were the way to provide light for people, and the full moon would be the brightest night of the month and a logical time to celebrate a holiday. So that gives the reason. And Purim, also the 14th of Adar, also right around the full moon as well. And yes, so Arnie, in terms of finding dates dating back 100 years, 200 years, etc. Yes, the technical way to figure that out would be with that first letter before the others that are like this year, 781, the 5,781, you have the letter Hey before that. Not all the rabbis in giving their dates would have had that first letter there. And so it's sometimes it's a little complicated to figure out, like when Nachmanides or Maimonides were putting the Hebrew date down, they may not have put the first Hebrew letter before the other dates. So so it makes it a little bit harder to correlate a Hebrew date with the regular calendar date. But of course, like everything else, there's a website for that. Hebcal, Hebcal. That's a great website, hebcal.com. So if you want to know, like, what was the Torah portion on your Shabbat of your bar mitzvah, and you don't remember what the Torah portion was, you can go to Hebcal, and one of the things on the front page is date converter. So you type in the date of your bar or bat mitzvah according to the regular calendar. Let's say mine was March 2nd, 1975. I put that in, and lo and behold, right away, it comes up and tells you what the Hebrew date was that day. It tells you what Torah portion was, what the Torah portion was that day. Just so happens I remember what my Torah portion was. But if you want to figure out a yahrzeit, somebody, God forbid, in your family passed away and you don't have the Hebrew date, because we traditionally observe the yahrzeit on the Hebrew date of death, not the regular calendar date of death. You can also go to that converter on Hebcal. So it's a great resource to try to figure that out. 25 years ago, before computers and the internet, there used to be a book, and I still have that book on my shelf. That is a Hebrew calendar that went ahead. I think it went ahead to like the year 2050. That's as far as ahead as that book went. Hebcal can go up to infinity in figuring out the calendar. So that's the way to figure out the calendars today. So any other questions about the calendar? Because I don't want to get that much more specific about it and have your eyes glaze over about it. But any other questions about that? Okay, so Tu Bishvat. Now, where does Tu Bishvat fit in? So as I said, holidays in our calendar, in the Jewish calendar, come from the Torah, plus Purim from the Bible, plus Hanukkah from Jewish history. And we also add now in modern times fast days. This is not so modern times. Also in history, we add fast days to the calendar. So there, Yom Kippur, of course, is a fast day, but that's in the Torah. But there are other fast days that are added to the calendar that are related to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So you have the 10th of Tevet, about a week or so after Hanukkah is over, is the 10th of Tevet, marking the beginning of the siege by the Babylonians of Jerusalem. There's the Fast of Esther, the day before Purim, which is historical, so to speak, if you believe that the book of Esther is a historical book. We'll get to that in a few weeks' time as we talk about Purim. So there's the Fast of Esther. There's the Fast of the Firstborn, right before the day of the Seder. And you have the 17th of Tammuz. That's one of the months in the summertime, marking the breaking of the siege of Jerusalem. And 3 weeks later, Tisha B'Av, marking the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And then the day after Rosh Hashanah, the 3rd of Tishrei, is known as the Fast of Gedaliah, which was the assassination of the last Jewish leader of the Jewish community in Israel, marking the end of leadership in Israel before the Babylonian exile. All those fast days, except for Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, are called minor fast days, meaning you fast from sunrise. One would fast from sunrise to sunset. A major fast day is 25 hours from sunset till nightfall the next day. So Tisha B'Av traditionally is a 25-hour fast. Yom Kippur also. I don't fast the minor fast days because all of them are related, except for I'm not a firstborn, so I don't fast for the firstborn. And the Fast of Esther, I don't fast that day either. The other days related to the siege of Jerusalem, I don't fast because of the idea that the state of Israel exists today and Jerusalem is rebuilt. And so there is within the conservative movement a sense that we don't need to fast these minor fast days anymore. 2 other days added to the calendar: Yom Hashawa, Holocaust Memorial Day. According to the United Nations, this week, January 27th, that is the United Nations designated international day to remember the Holocaust. It's related to the liberation of Auschwitz. And the Jewish calendar has instead Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, which is about a week after Passover is over. And that's related to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And the Knesset, Israel's parliament, designated Yom HaShoah as that date right after Passover and before Israel's Independence Day, to be sure that it had its own time and it wouldn't be distracted by anything else on the calendar, because the Warsaw Ghetto uprising happened around Passover. So to mix Yom HaShoah with Passover, it didn't seem appropriate to do that. So Yom HaShoah is added to the Jewish calendar, and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, is added to the Jewish calendar also. So that's just a general overview of the Jewish calendar and how that works. So what is Tu? I was afraid that this would happen, that it would take me a half hour to get to start talking about what Tu Bishvat is all about. Okay, so back to the rabbis and understanding the calendar and understanding what our obligations are in understanding the year. So and you might be asking yourselves, what kind of, why should it be so complicated to figure out the new year? Because we have Rosh Hashanah on the calendar already, the new year. And that's designated as what the Torah says is the first of the 7th month. The rabbis transformed the calendar from, instead of starting when Passover is, that agriculturally springtime made sense to be the beginning of the year. And so in ancient times, the new year would be celebrated in the spring. The rabbis changed the calendar to be a spiritual calendar and moved it to the fall. So the first day of the 7th month, since 7 is a special number. Look at Judy with her happy birthday balloon that just, I guess, just came to her door. So happy birthday on Wednesday, Judy, early celebration. The rabbis shifted Rosh Hashanah to the fall when that is. So you would think that's the new year, but there are other things in the year that have to be determined as when things start. So do all those things that we need to count make sense to count from the very same time? And so in other words, in the Mishnah, there's a section called on Rosh Hashanah. And the very first Mishnah, the very first section in that tractate, Rosh Hashanah, talks about these are the new years. These are the 4 new years that are celebrated. Besides Rosh Hashanah as we know it, coming to shul to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, there's also a new year to establish kings, when a king becomes king and we start counting the year. So according to when the king starts his reign, that's a new year also. So whenever the coronation is, that's a new year. There is a new year for tithing animals. So there is from the Torah an understanding that the firstborn animal belongs to God, and the first 10 of all animals born on your farm need to, it doesn't have to be a tenth of all your animals born need to belong to God too. That's tithing. So usually animals are born in the springtime. And so tithing, New Year for tithing animals, is in the springtime when it's natural for animals to be giving birth. So there's that new year. And then there's a new year for trees, and namely for fruit trees, because the first fruits also belong to God. So how are you going to determine what is a first fruit? It has to be determined by a date in the calendar on which, after this date, everything is considered new. Before this date is considered old. Okay, so the rabbis thought either the 1st of Shavat or the 15th of Shavat should be considered the new year for trees, based on when trees start blossoming and start producing fruit, when spring is over, when the winter rains are mostly over. So it was determined 15th of Shavat is a safe date, that before that there won't be any new fruits, and beyond that clearly the fruits will be coming after that date. So for the rabbis then, they created this idea of the calendar, that there needed to be a date to declare the new year for fruit trees, based on the law in the Torah of the first fruits needing to be offered to the temple in Jerusalem. First to the portable sanctuary in the desert, the Mishkan, and later to the temple in Jerusalem. So Tu Bishvat then became a time to focus on the agricultural produce and giving the gift to God of that produce. When we think of Tu Bishvat, we think of a holiday to celebrate nature and to celebrate trees in general, but and then by extension all of nature. That it's Jewish Arbor Day, or it's Jewish Environmental Consciousness Day. That didn't happen until post-temple and post-rabbinic times. Really, there was in the time of the mystics, in the late 1500s and 1600s in Israel, they came up with the notion to kind of celebrate nature on Tu Bishvat. See, because by that time, we Jews have since lost really our deep connection to the land, especially to the land of Israel. The Torah clearly points out that Judaism, or religion as defined in the Torah, is really land-based. We farm the land, we leave corner of the field to the poor, we give produce of the land to God. Animals who are on our farm, who grow on our land, et cetera, et cetera. So we're agriculturally based. We're an agrarian society according to the Torah. It was after the destruction of the temple that our society shifted from a land-based to a market-based economy. And so we begin to lose our connection to the land, especially when we are living in exile from the land of Israel. And traditional Jews still understand that we are living in exile. We're not living in the diaspora according to traditional Jews. We're living in exile. And there's a difference. If we live in exile, some entity caused us to be living in exile, right? So we're forced to live in exile. The Romans destroying the temple forced an exile. The Babylonians destroying the first temple forced an exile. But the tradition is God used the Babylonians and the Romans as a tool to punish us. So we are living in exile as a punishment for our sins. So traditional Jews understand that we're still in exile, looking forward to the Messiah coming to take us out of exile and bring us back to Israel. Other Jews understand that we are living in the diaspora, that just so we've just spread out around the world, and that's just the way it is. And with the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, we are back to the land, and we are choosing, as Jews in America, not to be living in Israel. It's not like we're waiting for the Messiah to come to bring us back. We can go back now to Israel if we wanted to. We are choosing not to. So it's a matter of religious perspective of where we're living. But that because we have been away from the land of Israel, we've lost that connection to the land itself. And Tu Bishvat then it has to take on different meaning. No longer the whole idea of needing to have first fruits of the tree being offered to the temple in Jerusalem doesn't apply to outside the land of Israel. These agricultural laws only apply to the land of Israel itself. So there's no obligation for us to, if we have enough of a property to have fruit trees on it, we're not obligated every spring to take a trip to Israel with the first apples or cherries or pears from our trees that we have in our backyard and make the trip to Israel and bring them to the temple in Jerusalem. There's no obligation to do that. So that sense of Tu Bishvat is not there anymore. So the rabbis of the mystical tradition changed the focus to kind of see how different kinds of fruits could represent different kinds of human beings. And they attached their mystical idea that we all contain within ourselves, and all of creation in the world around us contains a spark of God's presence in it. And that depending on how that creature, whether fruit or vegetables or human beings are formed, determines the kind of level of creature they are. So a Tu Bishvat Seder, for example, would have so that the rabbis of Jewish mysticism created a Seder similar to a Passover Seder to kind of focus on nature and the rebirth of nature. And they had, just as in a Passover Seder, we have 4 cups of wine, there are 4 cups of wine in a Tu Bishvat Seder. And just as there are different things that we eat over the course of the Passover Seder, so too there are different things we eat in a Tu Bishvat Seder. So I just want to, on a great website that gives you kind of a sense of of different Jewish concepts is something called My Jewish Learning. Just type that all in as one word. myjewishlearning.com is a great website that gives you a very good article to explain whatever concept you're looking up, and then gives you links to further reading. So there is a Tu Bishvat Seder on myjewishlearning.com. So I'm just give you an example of what the order of a Tu Bishvat Seder is and what the mystical rabbis of 500 years ago thought was important to be thinking about this time of year on Tu Bishvat. So the first cup of wine would be which would be a cup of white wine. So which would symbolize winter, the whiteness of the white snow of winter, and it reflects a mystical idea as well. And it reflects the idea of how God's energy infused the creation process with initial life. So you start with a blank screen, a white wine to begin the creation process. And the kind of fruit that you would eat for the beginning of the Seder would be fruit that is hard on the outside and soft on the inside, like a walnut, a coconut, or an almond. The hard shells symbolize the protection that the earth gives us and reminds us to nourish the strength and healing power of our own bodies. Okay? The second cup of wine would be wine that is mostly white with a little bit of red mixed into it to symbolize the passing of the seasons and the mystical concept of formation and birth, often associated with water. And the second fruit that you would have would be soft with a pit in the center. First fruit, hard on the outside, soft in the middle. This one, soft on the outside, pit in the center, like an olive. No, not a fresh olive off the tree, but a olive that had been soaked in brine. So that would be soft on the outside with a pit in the middle, or a date, or a peach or an apricot. And that symbolizes the life-sustaining power that emanates from the earth. It reminds us of the spiritual and emotional strength that is within each of us. The third cup of wine would be mostly red with a little bit of white, and it symbolizes the change of seasons and the mystical concept of creation. And the third fruit would be thoroughly as soft throughout and completely edible, like a fig or a grape, especially a seedless grape, or raisins. And this type of fruit symbolizes God's omnipresence and our own inextricable ties with the earth. And then the fourth cup of wine would be all red, no white in it at all. And it reflects the concept of fire, red like fire, that the idea that within all living things dwells a spark of God. And the fourth fruit would be a tough skin, but sweet fruit on the inside, like a mango or a banana or maybe an orange, and symbolizes the mystery of the world and our study of Torah. We are constantly seeking to uncover her secrets and are continually nourished by her fruits. So it's just understanding how Tu Bishvat transforms from a specific time of year for an agricultural and temple-based purpose to a more spiritual notion of trying to connect to the various fruit that we find on trees around us that we consume, and various types of wine that we might drink, and elevating all of that to this very deep spiritual, mystical concept of how we are intertwined with God and with nature, and how the divine spark is in everything. And certainly what I remember most about Tu Bishvat, since I went to Jewish day school almost throughout my education from kindergarten through 12th grade is, especially in elementary school, Tu Bishvat was at one of these holidays that you could spend a lot of time on in the Jewish studies part of the curriculum because you could connect to Israel. I remember way back at Kelman Academy in Cherry Hill, having the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, would have these cards where you would collect quarters and insert the quarters into the slots in these cards. And if you filled in all the slots with the quarters, you could send it back and plant a tree in Israel. So not sure you can do that anymore with quarters because I think it costs like $10 to plant a tree in Israel now. That back then, I guess it was $2 or $3 to plant a
We
tree.
use dimes, but I'm much older than you.
It was dimes in your day. Yeah, it was quarters in my day. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, so there was that. And then also getting that, the carob fruit, right? Which was disgusting. Whoever wanted to eat carob, but that was like a connection with Israel, one of the more ancient fruit trees, biblical fruit trees found in the land of Israel. And you'd always get a piece of carob. And then there are these songs to sing as well. It was another way with the establishment of State of Israel to kind of get reconnected, like all the kibbutzim that were founded in Israel before the establishment of State of Israel. All of that was like back to the land kind of movement. And all these Zionist songs that were written at that time talk about how wonderful it is to be back on the land of Israel and to be working the land. So that, there's the song about the almond tree blossoming. Yeah, boxer is the Yiddish term for carob. That's what that was. So, there's a song about the almond tree blossoming. Ashkedia porachat, shemesh pazorachat. The almond tree is blossoming because it's the first fruit tree to blossom in Israel. The almond blossoms would be appearing on the trees very shortly in the land of Israel, the first ones to blossom in Israel. So the almond trees are blossoming and the golden sun is shining. Birds from the rooftops are singing this Tu Bishvat higia chag la'ilanot. Tu Bishvat is here. It's the holiday for the trees. Well, the Zionists changed that. It's a holiday for people. According to the rabbis, it's the holidays for people to bring first fruits to God at the temple in Jerusalem. It only later became a holiday to celebrate nature and to celebrate the wonders of trees and other forms of nature all around us. So that is, that's what I wanted to share with you about Tu Bishvat today. Any questions or comments? Any other thoughts that you want to share here? Yes, Margie.
I learned somewhere, and I can't remember where, but somehow Tu Bishvat and Purim and Pesach are related with harvesting of wheat or planting wheat.
So, okay. So now you're asking me something that I'm not that familiar with. There is on some baked products, kosher baked products, you'll find a term on it, yashan. So that's related to the concept of old wheat versus new wheat. And around Pesach time, the old wheat, you're done with the old wheat, and then you bring an offering from the new wheat. And until that offering is made, you can't consume anything from the new wheat. Somehow, this is still incorporated into kashrut laws today. And that, Margie, I can't explain why, because it should only apply to the land of Israel. It shouldn't apply out here, outside of Israel, but somehow it does. And the very, very traditional are care about whether bread or any other baked products using wheat are using old wheat or new wheat.
So is the new wheat, would they consider that was planted on Tu Bishvat?
No, the new wheat is harvested after the first day of Passover. So it has nothing to do with Tu Bishvat or Purim. It has to do, wheat has to do with Passover. So you have Passover marks a first harvest, and then there's another harvest which is the first harvest of wheat, and that determines the new wheat versus the old wheat. And then bringing the Omer, counting the Omer is related to that. And then Shavuot is another harvest festival, both wheat and barley, and also first fruits. The first fruits are brought to the temple on the holiday of Shavuot. So Purim and Tu Bishvat are not related to that. The only relation between them to Passover is that they are, Tu Bishvat is a month before Purim, and Purim is a month before Passover, almost exactly a month, unless there's a leap year, and then you'd get an extra month of Adar between Purim and Passover. But this year there isn't. So Purim is the end of February, and Passover is the end of March. So that's the only connection in terms of the calendar. It's not to do with the wheat, as far as I know.
Okay, so here's I got a Pesach question.
Okay.
So if I have like matzo ball mix and farfel from last year, do I have to throw them out, or can I use them this year?
So that's a good question, Saul. The traditional answer is that you should not keep any of those matzah products from one year to the next, because theoretically they could become chametz. In other words, they could have fermented in some way by just sitting on your shelf from one year to the next. So certainly an open box of matzah, an open box of matzah farfel, that cannot be kept, that for sure. An unopened box, there's a question about that. It depends on how vacuum packed it is. So if it is vacuum packed, then you could keep it from one year to the next. Matzah, though, the matzah comes in this plastic bag, right? A cellophane kind of bag inside a cardboard box. So is that cellophane bag enough to keep it fresh, as if matzah can be fresh? Is that enough to keep the matzah fresh from one year to the next? To be safe, you shouldn't do that at all. But if it's totally unopened, you can use. Some would say that you could use it.
But that has nothing to do with new wheat versus old wheat.
No. It's all about whether that grain product, which is certified kosher for Passover as a form of matzah, becomes fermented. So that there are even some in the very, very Orthodox community that have a concept of gebrocht. So they won't even put anything moist on their matzah on Passover, because it might lead that matzah to becoming fermented, and therefore it would be chametz and not edible. So if you look at, well, I don't know if there are advertisements for this year, at Kosher for Passover resorts, they'll advertise, if you look at Hadassah Magazine or the Jewish Week or places like that, they advertise gebrocht and non-gebrocht is on the menu. So what that means is, if you believe in this idea that you shouldn't put anything moist on your matzah, like imagine not eating matzah with cream cheese on it or butter or margarine on it, that's the gebrocht people don't do that. And they wouldn't make matzah balls. They would not make matzah balls, because the matzah meal, mixing with the oil and boiling in the water, those matzah balls fluff up, right? Well, for the gebrocht people, they say that's making the matzah fermented and it's leavening, and you can't do that. So no matzah cakes, matzah meal and cakes or anything like that. You can't do that. That's the gebrocht. There's that idea. So that's what saving unopened matzah and matzah farfel and things like that from one year to the next is related to the potential or the risk that moisture would get in there and would make that fermented and make it chametz. Yes, Charlotte Shapiro.
What about
Charlotte Petoskey.
Yeah, what about seasonings like garlic powder and
Oh,
stuff
that,
like
yeah,
that?
once it's opened, it's as long as you keep it separate
Separate,
and
yeah,
stored away separate with other Passover stuff,
yes.
totally fine to use those products from one year to the next. It's
Right.
only the matzah-based products like matzah itself or matzah meal, matzah farfel, those matzah soup, matzah ball mix, those kinds of things from one year to the next, that there's a question. I'm just saying there's a
I didn't
question.
realize that.
If it's sealed tightly, like it comes already sealed, then there are some would say you can use that from one year to the next, but you will never in the kosher stores, you will never find leftover matzah from
No,
2020 for 2021 because of this very reason. Any other questions? All right, well, I promise you we'll talk more about Passover, and we'll spend a couple of
More
weeks talking
Passover.
about kosher laws of Passover and answering your questions about that. And hopefully a lot of people will be vaccinated by the end of March so that we can have seders again with our families. We're hoping that will happen. But so I wish everybody a good rest of the day. A happy birthday to Judy Beiser on Wednesday. A happy birthday to my mother on Wednesday, who are just a few years apart. And stay safe and healthy, everybody.
Thank you, Jonah.
Right, happy birthday to the birthday girls. Happy
Thank
birthday.
you.
May
Happy
may you have
birthday,
many more
girl.
in good health.
Happy birthday, Judy.
Happy birthday.